We are now on to divisional weekend of the 2023 NFL playoffs, and much like I did with the wildcard weekend, I'm going to do a preview of the 4 games coming up this Saturday and Sunday. I hope you all enjoy it. My first videos seem to be somewhat popular, so I might as well keep making these videos. Without further ado, let's begin. Beginning with Saturday's games, and the first game on the slate is Houston at Baltimore. This is an interesting dynamic because really all the quarterbacks left, every starting quarterback left in the playoffs at this point is under 30 years old, and there's really not a lot of legacy talk like there normally is outside of a couple of them. Mahomes, maybe Allen, but really nobody outside of Buffalo gives a shit about Josh Allen's legacy. And Lamar Jackson. And Lamar Jackson has played 4 playoff games. Everybody knows about his playoff struggles. He's been terrible in the playoffs thus far in his career, which I think has kind of caused people to overlook how consistently good he's been in the regular season. The fact that he wins at a historically dominant rate in the regular season. He really is one Super Bowl run away from people really reevaluating his career in terms of an all-time scale, because he's probably going to win another MVP this year. So you have this guy in Lamar Jackson who has everything to lose basically, even at the young age he's at, where he already has this reputation as a terrible playoff quarterback, which is mostly deserved. And then on the other hand, you have this hotshot rookie, CJ Stroud, who is playing with house money. The Texans, nobody expects them to do shit. None of the pressure's on them. So I think that dynamic is interesting. I think push comes to shove, you say who has the advantage at quarterback. I'm gonna have to say that the Ravens do, but it's pretty close. I think that in a year or two, CJ Stroud, unless he falls off a cliff, is going to be he's already one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But I think with Lamar Jackson, at this particular point in time, this is his moment. It's set up perfectly for him. You have the home field advantage, the 1 seed, time to get it done. I say the Ravens have, especially since the Ravens defense is good, I think the Ravens have the quarterback advantage, but just slightly. Running backs, in terms of the running game, this is easily an edge for Baltimore, as you might expect. They had the most rushing attempts, they had the most rushing yards in the league, they were 3rd in yards per carry, and they were 4th in rushing touchdowns with 26, whereas Houston was one of the worst teams rushing the ball in the league, which kind of makes CJ Stroud's season even more impressive. And this is despite Baltimore having several of their running backs go down for the season. But I think it's pretty, I know the joke is, oh, Lamar's a running back too, but I think for the most part, yeah, this is pretty easily, rushing the running backs are easily an advantage for Baltimore. Receivers, I would love to make an Odell Beckham poop joke here, but I don't really know if I can do that. The receivers, Nico Collins is a stud. Tank Dell looks pretty good. Dalton Schultz is a good tight end. This would be easier for me. I think that if Mark Andrews was playing in this game, which sounds like he's not going to, but Mark Andrews, if he was healthy, I would say that that gives Baltimore an edge. But because Mark Andrews isn't playing, you got Zay Flowers, who's just meh. Odell Beckham's been washed since like 2018. Isaiah Likely is a promising young tight end, but he still is just a rookie. Yeah, Nelson Aguilar, Rashad Bateman, there's nobody else there that really stands out. So I would say without Mark Andrews, I would give the advantage here to Houston. Offensive line, this is a big edge to Baltimore. And again, I am honest enough with you guys. I'm not going to sit up here and pretend like I'm one of those people that watches every single snap and every single player, offensive line, defensive line. I just say, you know what? What's the PFF grades? This is where I kind of lean on PFF and just trust them, even though I have my reservations about certain things PFF does, but I do think for the most part they're not bad when it comes to the lines of scrimmage. So when they have the Ravens as the 2nd best offensive line and Houston's 18th, I think that's a pretty sizable gap. No offense to Michael Strahan, but I mean, you have to be a good offensive line in order to have the best running game in the league. So the Ravens have the edge on the offensive line. Defensively, honestly, again, this is an edge to the Ravens. And it's not that the Texans are a bad defense team. I mean, just last week against the Browns, they had 2 pick sixes. On the season, they were 13th in points and yards allowed per drive, which is middle of the pack. The Ravens had the 1st ranked defense in terms of points allowed per drive, and they were 4th in yards allowed per drive. I got to be honest with you, for as long as I've been watching the league, which is a little over 20 years now, it seems like the Ravens never have a bad defense. I don't know what that is. For a while, I thought it was just, well, they had Ray Lewis and Ed Reed and Terrell Suggs and all these guys, but I'm looking at it right now on Pro Football Reference. I think they've had 19 top 10 scoring defenses in 28 years of existence. Do you know, that's fucking insane, man. It's like they always have a good defense to fall back on. It's crazy. And that's continued even long after Ray Lewis and all the legendary Hall of Fame players have left there. It's really crazy. They always seem to have a good defense. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, so Baltimore has the edge defensively. Special teams, I joke about Justin Tucker not being a Hall of Famer Famer because I don't think any kicker or punter belongs in the Hall of Fame, but he's still probably the standard, or at least close to it in terms of field goal kickers. So I give the Ravens the edge there. Punting wise, I would say that it's somewhat of a toss-up. Cameron Johnston from Houston's a very good punter. Jordan Stout from Baltimore, his net yards per punt was pretty far down there in terms of league rankings, while Johnston was top 5 in net yards per punt. But I also, as evidenced by my previous video and this one, I like looking at the percentage of punts down inside the opponent's 20-yard line stat, and both Houston and Baltimore were in the top 8 this year in terms of that, punting-wise. So these are punters, both are pretty capable. I would give Houston the edge in terms of punting. I would say that at the end of the day, though, push comes to shove, it's pretty much a toss-up, but I slightly lean towards Baltimore just because Justin Tucker's track record. And finally, we get to the coaching, and this again is an edge to Baltimore. Although we talk about a lot about Lamar Jackson needing to prove something in the playoffs, and obviously John Harbaugh, he has a Super Bowl, but he only has 2 playoff wins in the last decade. So this is a guy who, despite the constant regular season success the Ravens have had, and Harbaugh he's probably going to make the Hall of Fame someday. I think another Super Bowl run would seal it, but you look at his career winning percentage, his win-loss record. This is a guy who, his first 5 years, it's similar to Joe Flacco because they both came in together at the same time with the Ravens. His first 5 years, 9 of his 11 career playoff wins came within his first 5 years, including that 2012 playoff run. Since then, the last 10 years, only 2 playoff wins, no conference championship game appearances. So I think Harbaugh also has something to prove, but he does have a resume. At this point, D'Amico Ryans is basically, this is a by default choice. D'Amico Ryans, he came into a situation where there were 0 expectations. The Texans, they hit on a quarterback, which always makes a coach look better. That's not to say that D'Amico Ryans isn't a good coach, but I feel like you don't know just off of one season. So I give Harbaugh and Baltimore the edge here, but I do think there is some pressure on Harbaugh to do something, kind of a what have you done for me lately type of thing. My final prediction, I expect Baltimore to find a way to win this one. I'm going to say Baltimore wins 27-17. I mean, honestly, if they can't get it done this year, they are never going to get it done in the Lamar Jackson era. Now moving on to the San Francisco-Green Bay game. Seems like these two teams meet every single year in the playoffs. The 49ers, it's interesting. We all know, and you might not know this, but the 2 quarterbacks for Green Bay before Jordan Love were both first ballot Hall of Famers, Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre, famous welfare respecter. Favre absolutely dominated the 49ers in the playoffs, and the 49ers absolutely dominated Aaron Rodgers. So I don't know what to expect with Jordan Love. Again, it has nothing to do with these current 2 teams. But obviously, San Francisco being the 1 seed and Green Bay being the 7th seed, even after their demolition of the Cowboys last week, which, thank you, by the way. Jordan Love has been playing at an unbelievably high level the last couple weeks, and so there's a temptation to say, well, Green Bay has the quarterback advantage. And I said this a couple times, I think, but Brock Purdy is still kind of an unknown despite his monster stats, and that's kind of the Shanahan effect, Kyle Shanahan effect, which is similar to me like the Coors Field effect in baseball, where if you're a hitter and you play for the Rockies, if you hit like 350, people are always like, well, he might be good, but Coors Field effect. The same thing with Kyle Shanahan and quarterbacks. It's like if you're a quarterback, you put up great numbers with the Niners and Kyle Shanahan. It's like, okay, he might be good, but, and so I feel like a lot of people still, I think Brock Purdy is good. I think he's a good quarterback. I certainly don't think he's a bad quarterback. I don't think you can be a bad quarterback and put up the numbers he's done. Do I think that Shanahan's scheming people open? Do I think the talent around him makes him look a little better than he might actually be? Sure, I can buy that. But at the same time, it's kind of like he had a couple bad games. For the most part, he's done his fucking job ever since he's been into the league. So I would say, despite the fact I think Jordan Love in a vacuum might be the better quarterback in terms of the talent, I would say that Brock Purdy, being at home, having the better team around him, I would say that, and at the quarterback position, that matters a lot, obviously. I would say that gives San Fran the quarterback edge. But if Jordan Love is able to outplay Purdy and pull off another upset over the 49ers, then it kind of gets pretty serious. But I would say the 49ers have the quarterback edge. Get to the running backs, and everybody knows about Christian McCaffrey, super hardworking daughter dater, 1950s middle America approved running back. You look overall at 49ers rushing attack, they led the league in rushing touchdowns. They were 4th in yards per attempt. They were 3rd in rushing yards. Green Bay, despite Aaron Jones, who is basically always injured every year and never given much of a heavy workload, but he has these stretches where he seems to play very well, like he did against Dallas, and he's on a good stretch right now. The Packers' run game isn't terrible by any means. They were 9th in yards per attempt, but they throw the ball a lot more than they run it. So, and I think that McCaffrey is better than Aaron Jones. Not to be racist, but I think that it's pretty obvious that the 49ers have the edge in terms of running the ball. Going to the receivers and tight ends, and all I hear now is how young Packers receivers are. And it's true. They're very young. Like, the most famous and well-known receiver that they have might be Christian Watson. And he wasn't even one of their 3 top receivers this year in terms of yards. Now, he missed half the season, but, nobody really knows, who isn't a diehard football fan, nobody really knows about Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave. These guys are all 23 years or younger. So that doesn't mean that they're bad, though. Like, this is the one thing I will say. I'll say, like, it does annoy me when somebody, especially Packers fans, and people do this all the time to kind of hype up their quarterback, is, well, he's doing this with the youngest roster and the youngest receiving core. I'm like, okay, well, just because they're young doesn't mean that they're bad. You know what I mean? For all we know, a large reason why Aaron Rodgers had a bunch of early career success and a lot of his best years statistically came early in his career is because his receiving group was loaded. And, you look at guys like Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, even another guy like Donald Driver, if you go back to Favre, like, these guys all came into the league with really low expectations or not that high of expectations, and they all ended up becoming, very good to dominant receivers. And that's just me off the top of my head. So you look at these guys, like, there's no reason to think that in a couple years this receiving core for the Packers won't be the best, couldn't be the best in the league. I mean, it's completely unknown. But right now, at this point in time, 49ers once again get the edge here. Brandon Ayuk, leading receiver for them, over 1,300 yards, didn't make the Pro Bowl. George Kittle is probably the best all-around tight end in the league. Deebo Samuel, I feel like he could be a 1,500-yard receiver every year if he wasn't used as kind of a thick, fat Tavon Austin. McCaffrey, obviously, out of the backfield. Like, San Francisco does have so much talent on their roster, and so they have the edge at receiver. For now, if I did this video a couple years from now, who knows? But in this moment, 49ers have the edge. Going to the offensive lines, the Packers had the 8th ranked offensive line. The 49ers, surprisingly, by PFF, were ranked only 15th, and that kind of surprises me because you think about Trent Williams, who's one of the most decorated and dominant offensive linemen in recent memory, will probably be in the Hall of Fame. 49ers, on paper, seem like a more dominant offensive line than what their rankings suggest. But I will say that the Packers' offensive line has done a pretty good job. They did a great job last week at Dallas, so I'll give Green Bay surprisingly the edge here along the offensive line. Defensively, I think this is pretty easy. We all know 49ers have the edge here defensively. All the big names, Bosa, Fred Warner, they got Chase Young, big names. Surprisingly, though, they were 9th in points allowed per drive. I thought they'd be better, and I also thought that they'd be better in yards per drive, which is they were 14th, but that's still better than the Packers, who were in the bottom 10 in the league in both points and yards allowed per drive. So the 49ers defense, they had the edge defensively. Special teams, Jake Moody was pretty solid this year for the Niners. Only missed 1 extra point. He kicked 61 of them. 84% on field goals, which isn't great, but it's not terrible either. Both were better than Anders Carlson missed 5 extra points this year. 87% extra point, which is not great. So kicking is pretty, to me, it's pretty straightforward. It's like, it's binary. You either made it or you didn't. So kicking wise, I give the 49ers the edge in terms of field goal kicking. Punting, I also give the 49ers the edge. This is a pretty big disparity. Mitch Wisnowski was 2nd in the league in terms of downing opponents inside the 20-yard line. 50% of his punts ended up inside the opponent's 20-yard line, which is amazing. He also, for what it's worth, was top 10 in net yard punt, whereas Daniel Whelan from the Packers, he was one of the lower ranked punters in terms of inside the 20 percentage and also net yards for punts. So this is a pretty significant edge to the 49ers in terms of punting. So the special teams edge, once again, I have to go with the 49ers. We move on to coaching, and if this was a handsome competition, I think Matt LaFleur would win, but I would say that Shanahan obviously gets the edge here because he really is an offensive genius, despite the fact that he was also pretty much responsible for the worst sports moment of my life, which was Super Bowl 51. And he's also blown a lead in the Super Bowl 2019 versus the Chiefs, although he did call a pretty good play that Jimmy Garoppolo fucked up. So, and also the 2021 NFC Championship game versus the Rams, they blew that. So he does have it. That's the only weakness. The only thing preventing him, I think, he's on track to be a Hall of Fame head coach. Because he's only 44, and 49ers look set up to be the next dynasty, or at the very least in the mix every single year for the foreseeable future. So he's going to rack up a bunch of career wins after the first couple years that were pretty slow. But he's finally, I think the results have started to finally match up to his reputation, and San Francisco gets the edge edge in terms of coaching, but I think Matt LaFleur, in terms of play calling, was pretty impressive last week versus the Cowboys. That, to me, was probably the most impressive win he's had as the coach of the Packers. Prediction time. The Packers are on a hot streak. Jordan Love is on a heater. Everything is going perfect in Packerland. They have all the momentum, and that is exactly why I'm picking the 49ers to win, because every hot streak and every heater has to come to an end eventually, and that's going to happen this week to the Packers. I think the 49ers win 35-24. We now move to Sunday's games, and the first game on the slate is Tampa Bay at Detroit. It's pretty crazy to think that one of Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, or Brock Purdy is going to be in the Super Bowl, barring injury, for the NFC. That's fucking crazy. Anyway, look at the quarterbacks. Baker is on a heater, and he's honestly been one of the weirdest quarterbacks to evaluate, because I was on the Baker bandwagon for a while because he had that great rookie year, and then his second year he stunk, and then he had a bounce back year in 2020 and he won a playoff game, and then we all remember his final year with Cleveland where he stunk, but he had injuries, and so I was in on Baker, and then he goes to Carolina, and then he stinks there, and he gets traded to the Rams, and he just again put up bad numbers, and so I finally got off the Baker bandwagon when I should have stayed on it, because I was one of the last people that was, I feel like before this comeback season by Baker, I feel like I was one of the few people that was like, I don't think he's terrible the way people do, but I should have stuck to my guns. But I would say overall, both these guys, I think Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff are pretty much in the same tier of quarterbacks. Like they're capable of incredible performances, but they're also still capable of losing you games, and you still don't trust them completely in big moments. And I think that's what, we all talk about, everyone's like talking about the Lions and how great it was that they won the playoff game and Jared Goff was great, and he had a good game, but the Lions scored 3 points in the second half. You know what I mean? Like the Lions only had 3 points in the second half, so it wasn't as if he came out and had a monster first half. Goff did, but he was kind of slow in the second half. Like the Rams had an amazing opportunity to win that game, so the Lions escaped. So it wasn't like Goff had a dominant four-quarter performance. Basically what I'm trying to say is I think both these quarterbacks, it wouldn't surprise me either way if you came out and said, oh my god, Baker Mayfield outplayed Jared Goff, or Jared Goff outplayed Baker Mayfield. Either way, I'd say, I could see that happening. I will say that because Goff put up better stats this season, he put up much better stats last season, I think that the synergy that he has, he's in the situation now with Detroit where it just seems that he has finally found a place for him and he's clicking. And Baker Mayfield too. They're both playing really well. I would give Goff the slightest of edges though, just because I feel like he's a little bit more stable than Mayfield is on a week-to-week basis, but they're pretty much the same tier of quarterback. Good, not great. Running back, this is easily Detroit. Again, Tampa's one of the worst running teams in the league, maybe the worst running team in the league, whereas Detroit is dominant. They were tied for the lead in terms of rushing touchdowns this year. They were 5th in yards per attempt. Both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are very good. Craig Reynolds also isn't bad either. So this is pretty straightforward. The Lions have a massive edge running the ball. And again, I think by and large, I'm not one of those idiots that says you have to run the ball well to sell the play action, but I do think it does help your quarterback when you have a strong run game to take pressure. I mean, that's pretty much common sense. So I think that's another reason why I expect Goff to outplay Mayfield, and I gave the Lions the edge at quarterback, was because of the running game, because it doesn't feel like there's as much pressure on Goff's shoulders in order for the Buccaneers to win as there is on Mayfield's shoulders for the Lions to win. But feels like there's less margin for error for Baker. But yeah, running back goes to Detroit. Receiving core, we all know about the Buccaneers receivers at this point. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, those are the two headliners. Amon-Ra St. Brown, first team All-Pro, didn't make the Pro Bowl, which is always interesting to me. Sam Laporta looks like he's going to be the next great tight end. Josh Reynolds is fine. Jameson Williams is interesting. He's objectively been a draft bust. He was picked 12th overall in 2022, and so far in his career he has 390. He doesn't even have 400 receiving yards. But he's one of those guys that is still capable of taking the top off of any defense. You have to respect his speed. Both these teams, I think, are very top-heavy in terms of their receiving talent. Very similar. They have one or two really, really good options. I'll give Tampa Bay the edge here just off of playoff experience and the fact that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are both champions, and they've been there before. They've carried lackluster quarterbacks to championships before. I give them the edge. But again, I'm trying to avoid toss-ups this week because I feel like that's a bit of a cop-out. So if push comes to shove, I would say Tampa has the edge. But it's so fucking close, dude. No offense to Ray Allen. We get to the offensive line. This is, again, pretty straightforward. Detroit has the edge here. They are the 4th-ranked offensive line. I mean, Kenai Sewell is one of the best offensive linemen in the league. Frank Ragnow is a great player. They just have dogs, man. They have dogs up front. Whereas Tampa Bay, again, again, not terrible. They had the 11th ranked offensive line. Tristan Wirfs, he's been there since he's been consistent, although he had some struggles, but he seems to have bounced back. Neither of these offensive lines have graded out poorly, but Detroit, I think, gets the edge there because they just have the bigger names and they've been incredibly dominant. And the rushing game, specifically the rushing stats, gives them the edge. Defense, this is an interesting one. I would say Tampa has the edge defensively. They were 12th in points allowed per drive. Detroit was 26th in points allowed per drive. So that right there is a pretty big deal. Although they were both 20th or worse. Detroit was 20th in yards allowed per drive defensively. Tampa Bay was 23rd in yards allowed per drive. So neither of these teams defensively were particularly great or noteworthy in the regular season. But Tampa Bay last week against my Eagles, where they blew us out, was pretty fucking good defensively. They constantly got pressure on Jalen Hurts. And because they were ranked higher in points allowed per drive, when in doubt, look at the most important stat. It's not DVOA, it's not EPA, whatever the fuck all these Brady fans have tried to poison the masses with for all these years defensively. You look at the most important stat, points win games. The team that scores more points wins the game. Not more DVOA, not the most EPA, points. That's what fucking wins games. And if you can look at how good or how bad a defense is on a per possession basis, so time possession is accounted for, you can really get a good sense of how good a defense is. So the Buccaneers defense gets the edge. Special teams, I'm going to give this to Tampa Bay. Chase McLaughlin, I'm surprised he did not make the Pro Bowl this year. Made every extra point, was 29 of 31, so 94% of his field goals. He had basically a near perfect season. And whereas the Lions are on their second kicker, Michael Badgley, he's already missed 2 extra points as a Lion, although he did make a clutch 54-yard field goal in last week's game. But I give the kicking edge goes to the Buccaneers there. In terms of punting, it's interesting. Jake Camarda is weird. They're almost identical. Jake Camarda for the Buccaneers and Jack Fox of the Lions. They were basically the same in net yards per punt, but Jack Fox was 5th in inside the 20 percentage, which is a very important indicator, and Jake Camarda was 24th. So in terms of pinning opponents deep in their own territory, Detroit was much better at that in terms of punting. So Detroit gets the punting edge. Tampa Bay gets the kicking edge. Push comes to shove, I'm going to give the edge to Detroit just because the gap in terms of punting is bigger than the gap between the kickers in terms of field goal. That's just, again, what am I going to do? Coaching advantage, Dan Campbell versus Todd Bowles. To me, Dan Campbell gets the edge here. I really thought Todd Bowles was going to be one of the first coaches fired this year, but he proved me wrong, and obviously they won last week, but I still don't really think much of him as a coach. And I think what Dan Campbell has done with the Lions is pretty incredible thus far, so Campbell gets the edge in coaching. Prediction time. It's been a wonderful ride for the Buccaneers, and they've done a lot to help my Tom Brady system quarterback narrative and piss off Brady fans, which is always good, but the ride comes to an end this week. The Lions, to me, these teams already played once this year, and I know every game is different, but these teams already played once this year. The Lions won pretty decisively, and that was on the road. The Lions are at home. I would be stunned if Tampa Bay won this game. I think the Lions get it done. They win 28-21. And finally, we finish with the most anticipated game of the weekend for most people, which is the Chiefs at Bills. And this is the third installment of the Patrick Mahomes-Josh Allen rivalry in the postseason, the 7th game overall. Really, every game these teams have played against each other, or almost every game rather, that these guys have played against each other has pretty much gone down to the wire. This is also noteworthy because this is going to be, and you might not have heard this before on the talk shows, but this is the first true road playoff game of Mahomes' career. This is his 6th postseason, his 16th career playoff start overall. I do find it hilarious that Mahomes detractors have somehow found a way for him having a good enough record every year to get home field advantage as a negative. Now, I will say he has gotten lucky at times, like in 2019, Baltimore choked, and so it's taken some upsets to help keep that home playoff game streak alive. But the thing is, Mahomes for his career, statistically, has been better on the road than he has been at home. So I don't see any reason to think that he's going to have an off game. I think he was better than his numbers showed versus the Dolphins, even though that was a pretty easy win. But this might be, we always talk about, this is the next era of Brady versus Peyton. This really, though, might be the one quarterback matchup that already has some legendary chapters in it and still has plenty of room to grow. So this might be the one quarterback matchup for the next generation that actually might be the next Brady versus Manning rivalry. And if you know anything about the Brady-Manning rivalry, you would know that Brady won the first 2 playoff matchups and then Peyton won the third. Now, this is obviously the third. So are the script writers of the NFL, they're going to give Josh Allen, and again, how did Peyton win his first playoff game against Tom Brady in 2006? By leading a comeback from down down 21-3. So if the Chiefs go up big early and the Bills end up making a comeback to win the game, hey, might be a little bit curious. But anyway, who has the advantage of quarterback? It's Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes, to me, in a vacuum, he's probably the best quarterback to ever play. And Josh Allen is also a great player. But I think this is really one of the only times where Buffalo wouldn't have the quarterback advantage. And this is also why Mahomes is Buffalo's boogeyman. But Buffalo has a chance. They're at home. It's on their turf. They have a chance to really exercise some demons. But Kansas City and Mahomes have the better quarterback. Running back advantage. The Chiefs, really not a great running team. The Bills, in really every metric statistically, were better. Now, having Allen, who ran for 15 touchdowns this year, one of the biggest dual threat quarterbacks of all time, that does help with the rushing stats and the average. I get that. But James Cook's a Pro Bowl back. I know the Pro Bowl has its flaws, but I think for the most part, it's still pretty good. Pacheco is a good player. Clyde Edwards-Helaire sucks. I think that the Bills, because of Josh Allen, and Mahomes can scramble too, obviously. Mahomes, half sneaky athlete, you know what I mean? Mahomes can scramble too when he needs to, but Allen is the better running quarterback. I would say that the Bills have the edge in terms of running backs. Receiver, I mean, this is obviously the Bills. I would think that this is, I'll keep saying it, and we saw it even last week versus the Dolphins, where the Chiefs receivers cost Mahomes, several big gains and stuff. If there is ever a reason to pick against the Chiefs this year, which is ironic because this is by far the best defense they've had in the Mahomes era, it's because their receiving core and their tight ends with Travis Kelce, and again, we all know, did you know that Travis Kelce is dating Taylor Swift? Oh my God. Like, they've literally actively cost the Chiefs games. And I say that as somebody who I really, really hate weapons talk, and I hate because I think that in terms of value, really receivers, you think about all the teams that have won championships, and you think about how many teams won championships with like dominant receivers. Receiver is one of those positions that usually is eye candy, but the results, like the Chiefs last year, they won without any good receivers. They had Travis Kelce, obviously, but their receiving core last year wasn't good. Like Juju Smith-Schuster was their best receiver last year. Teams win Super Bowls all the time without elite receivers. It's more so the fact that the Chiefs receivers actively, they drop passes, they fumble. It's shit like that truly can have an impact on games. And I'm not saying anything, I'm not really breaking any massive news here, but the Chiefs receivers, I just have the feeling if the Chiefs don't win the Super Bowl this year, it's going to be because one of their receivers fucked up again, because they've already cost, literally against the Bills, and we all know, literally against the Bills this season. The reason this game isn't in Arrowhead is because Kadarius Toney's a fucking idiot and lined up, offsides versus the Bills to negate the game-winning touchdown in that game. So it's just, obviously this is the edge to Buffalo, but if Kansas City doesn't win Super Bowl this year and Kansas City loses this game, I would bet a lot of money on one of the receivers or Kelce or one of their tight ends dropping a pass or fumbling or doing something or having a drop turn into an interception. So Buffalo gets the major edge. At receiver. In terms of grades for offensive lines, these two teams were really right next to each other. Kansas City was 14th, Bills were 16th. I guess I would give the advantage to Buffalo slightly though, because the Chiefs tackles are susceptible to giving up pressures and the Bills had a better running game this year. So I would say that gives the Bills the advantage offensively. This is like the first time I'm actually going against PFF's rankings because I'm just such a fucking hero. Defensively, I never thought I would say this, but this is the edge goes to Mahomes' team because Mahomes' defenses were so dog shit for the first 5 years he was a starter. Now they're elite, which is ironic because this is by far the worst offense. And I've been told nonstop by a particular former quarterback's fan base that the better your offense is, the better your defense is going to be because they're going to be well rested and all this stupid bullshit that is so easily disprovable by mountains of evidence over decades of people playing football in the NFL. Anyway, that was just a deflection. But the Chiefs have the better defense. Although I'll say this, there's really no defense for Josh Allen when he decides to scramble. It's pretty insane. It's kind of like why doesn't he just do this all the time? When he decides to scramble, the pocket collapses. It's a guaranteed 15-20 yards every fucking time. Now maybe Josh Allen will do another fake slide where he breaks off a 50-yard touchdown like he did last week. But I think the Chiefs defense should keep them in the game. And Buffalo's defense isn't too shabby either. They were 7th in points allowed per drive. The Chiefs were 3rd, but the Chiefs get the edge defensively here only by a little bit because Buffalo's defenses have had a tendency, particularly against Mahomes, to fold in the postseason as we've already seen twice in the last 4 years. Kicking, I will say, goes to Harrison Butker and the Chiefs. Consistent. We already saw last week Brandon Bass, Buffalo's kicker, they had a field goal blocked, which I wouldn't say is all on the kicker, but he did miss a chip shot 26-yard field goal, or a chip shot field goal at the very end of the game. It didn't affect that game against the Steelers because there was like a minute left and they were up 14. But still, interesting. Just keep that in mind to see if it bleeds into this week because as we all know, kickers and their psyches and their confidence, very, very unstable most of the time. But Kansas City gets the edge there. there. In terms of punting, this is an interesting one. The Chiefs punter, Tommy Townsend, averaged more net yards per attempt than Buffalo's Sam Martin. But Sam Martin also had the 4th highest percentage in terms of pinning opponents inside their 20. So Sam Martin was way better at pinning opponents deep in their own territory, which is really, I think, more the most valuable aspect of punter is pinning your opponent deep in their own territory. That's kind of the entire point, is to shift field position. Anyway, that gap is substantial, and Tommy Townsend was 23rd out of 33 qualified. Sam Martin 4th out of 33. So in terms of punting, the Chiefs had, the Bills rather, had a major advantage. I would say, though, if it came down to it, I would give the Chiefs, despite the disparity in punting, I would say that I trust Mahomes to score on long fields more than I trust Brandon Bass to make clutch field goals. That's really what it comes down to. The coaching, this is Andy Reid versus Sean McDermott. Andy Reid, there's an Al-Qaeda joke in here somewhere, but Andy Reid gets the edge here, even though this isn't the best year. Again, I think every game, unless we get possibly a 49ers Chiefs Super Bowl rematch, I would say that, Kansas City has the coaching edge really in every game, besides possibly the 49ers out of all the teams that are still left. So coaching edge goes to the Chiefs. The narrative is that Buffalo has really won the last couple years in spite of Sean McDermott, which I don't know is true, but I will say the Bills are 6-0 since the Al-Qaeda article came out. So maybe, who knows? Prediction time. This is very difficult. I spent literally 7 hours. No, I didn't, but I'm just messing with you. But I go back and forth on this. Is this going to be the year where the script writers finally have Buffalo and Josh Allen break through to beat the big bad bully and Patrick Mahomes? Or is this going to be just another chapter on Mahomes' path to becoming the GOAT quarterback? Push comes to shove, I think Kansas City is going to win this game. I think it's going to come down to the wire. I think Kansas City wins 27-24. They win on a field goal as time expires. Mahomes leads the game-winning drive. That's just my gut. If you don't like it, go pound sand.